Okay guys, welcome back to the Hybrid Athlete channel. In today's vlog, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I really like to use these things called cluster sets at the start of my training blocks, particularly for a strength block. And there's many reasons for this. One is because it allows me to build a lot of volume at a relatively high intensity fairly quickly, and using the block periodization model that I use and I've discussed in my other videos. It's a pretty good reason as to why. It's also a really good reason. It's kind of a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. So if you want to build muscle, power, strength, it's a really efficient way of ticking all of those boxes within one session. Now, if that sounds a little bit clickbaity, a bit like this is the greatest way to train ever, it's because it is. Okay. On a more serious note, it's not the greatest way to train ever. It's a good platform to then peel off and then focus more specifically on strength, power, hypertrophy, whatever it is we might want to do in a specific block. So it's a good jack of all trades approach. Now, cluster sets are closely related to some of the concepts that are involved in velocity-based training. So I use cluster sets, but the way that I do it in my clinic and the way that I do it with my athletes is using a velocity-based approach. Well, why? Why use velocity? Before we get into what clusters are, why use velocity? Well, the velocity of a movement is likely to be, in fact it is, related to the adaptation that we're trying to elicit from that exercise. So for example, if we're looking at muscle hypertrophy, there's certain thresholds that our velocity will have to be below in order to create the mechanical tension and the effects that we would need to build muscle. If we're trying to do something fast and dynamic to build power, rate of force development, whether that's maximum rate of force development or peak power, not necessarily the same thing, we might need to make sure that our exercises, the movements that we're doing, are performed within a specific velocity range to cause those adaptations. So what cluster sets are really designed to do is to make sure that we do get some of this, as we go through a set of exercise, we will get fatigue and we get velocity loss. That's what happens. What these cluster sets are designed to do is to minimize that velocity loss. And if we, depending on how we tweak our sets, if we can find a sweet spot, what we do is we might get a little bit of velocity loss and fatigue, so we get some of the strength hypertrophy adaptations, but we don't get so much like we drop off that we can then recover a little bit, and then we can keep that relative intensity high, and we can increase both the intensity and the volume that we are staying at a percentage of our 1RM or above a percentage of our 1RM, which is going to help both bolster strength and muscle hypertrophy, and because of the overall training volume that we are applying. Now, if we haven't got velocity-based approaches, it's not an easy thing to do, it's not cheap kit. One of the things that we can look at is using cluster sets, and we can progress these. And I'm going to tell you how I progress these myself personally. Really simple to do once you've done a little bit of maths. So let's look at how let's say a normal hypertrophy session would look. So you might say, okay, I'm going to do a hypertrophy session and do bench press, and I'm going to do 3 sets of 12 repetitions with 2 minutes rest in between. So that would be like a traditional kind of set to look at. Now, a cluster set, what we might say is we're going to do sets of 4 reps with 30 seconds rest in between each 4 in these sort of micro rest periods. But then we'll do a set of 4, 30 seconds rest, a set of 4, 30 seconds rest, a set of 4, 2 minutes rest, and then you can then build through those blocks. Now, the sets then are going to take a little bit longer because we're taking that little bit more rest period. But the amount of volume that we're doing is at a much higher percentage of a 1RM. Because if we're doing 4 reps, these aren't going to be 4 rep maxes with only 30 seconds rest. But those little micro pauses, those little interset rests, as opposed to the intraset rest. So interset we're going to talk about as being the rest period in those clusters, whereas intraset is between the cluster sets, if that makes sense. So you can structure this in any different way you want. You could do doubles with 30 seconds rest, doubles up until like say 30 reps of bench press. You can structure these in many different ways, but obviously the shorter the reps and the fewer the amount of reps that we're doing and the longer the rep duration, the fewer the amount of reps we're doing and the longer the rest duration, the higher the intensity that we can work at. And also then as well, if we then string those together or we adjust the rest periods, we can actually get a hell of a lot more volume done with a lot less time, okay? So in the example I've just given there, we're still taking that 2 minutes intra-rest period, whereas actually we might just go 4 30 seconds rest, 4 30 seconds rest, 4 30 seconds rest, 4 30 seconds rest, all the way through, and actually accumulate more volume in the same relative amount of time. If we take our rest periods that we would use, say, over a classic traditional set, and then we just divide those up fairly evenly. And like I said, we can take that even further. So we could do singles, we can do doubles, we can do triples. And then what we can do to progress that is really simple. We can then say, okay, I'm going to try and do, let's think of a good example, one that I do personally. I'm going to try and do triples, okay, with 1 minute's rest in between sets of triples. And I'm going to try and do 30 reps at 85% of my one rep max, okay? So let's say I'm going through, boom, 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 2 minutes rest, 3 minutes rest, 3 minutes rest, 3 minutes rest. I go straight away through that cluster set, but the last set or so I'm reaching failure. Well, okay, what do? I can then just simply increase the rest period next time till I do achieve all those sets, or I can just reduce the load in that last set until I can complete the sets, or reduce the load across the board, depending on how much time you've got in that inter-set rest period. So this is cluster sets, cluster training it's more of a concept than like a look, you do this. In the same way that hypertrophy training is, it's like you can do 2 sets of 15, 3 sets of 12, 4 sets of 8, whatever it is, as long as you're building volume at the right intensity to cause the right stimulus, okay? I just really like cluster sets because in that example that I've given you there, to take it back to something that works for me, the old anecdotal thing, if I'm doing a triple on a bench press, and let's say the triple I'm doing on a bench press is the equivalent of maybe my 5 or 6 rep max, okay? So if I do 4 sets of 5 of bench at that same load, then if I take 4 minutes rest, 3 minutes rest minimum, 4 minutes rest, let's call it on average, that means that whole sequence is taking me about, maybe a minute to do the set to get set up, then a rest period. So each set's taking 5 minutes. If I do 4 sets, that's taking me 20 minutes to get through that amount of volume. 20 minutes to get through that amount of total volume with just taking each set to near failure. It might even take longer if I'm really pushing, like each set is like right on the limit. But if I was to do a cluster set and I was to take 3 reps with a minute's rest in between, and don't forget that's only 20 reps, 4 sets for 20 reps worth of work. If I do 3 reps and take a minute, within 15 minutes, I could have easily built up 20 plus reps to up to 30 plus reps, depending on how much fatigue I've got. And then what I can do to adjust that is, look, if I feel like I need a little bit more rest, I can take it. Feel like I need a little bit more rest, I can take it. Now, yes, we want to standardize these clusters as much as is possible. But like I said, they're a really quick, easy, and efficient way to build muscle and to build strength and to build power as well, depending on what percentage of our 1 rep max that we want to use. Now, if you're not familiar with taking a 1 rep max, I wouldn't advise you just doing that on a back squat or a hex deadlift. Literally, you can just start and play with the numbers for the first few weeks. So you might say, okay, I've got a good idea of what I normally lift for 5 reps or 10 reps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to half the number of reps and then half the number of rest period I would normally take between sets, and just put that, in between those clusters. And then you can just expand or contract those however you want. So, singles, doubles, triples, 3s, 5s, 4s, sets of 10 would be a crazy amount of volume and intensity, but play with it. And that's the thing for me. As long as I'm in those intensity ranges that I know are going to be building strength and building muscle in those early phase, like I said, overloading blocks in my block periodization model, then I'm happy. So I'm always in that 80 to 85% of my 1 rep max range. And if I don't know what that is, I will just guesstimate and say, right, roughly speaking, if I'm doing between 7 to 10 sets of 2 to 3 reps with 90 seconds, a minute to 2 minutes rest in between, I'm probably in a good zone for building a lot of volume, a lot of strength, and a lot of power very quickly. If my rest periods are starting to get up above 2 minutes and my intensity, is low, then I might as well just be doing straight sets. And that's probably an indicator that you need to drop the load, take the ego out of the equation so that you can actually build this volume. So yeah, that's the whole point. It allows us to kind of not fatigue within each set, keep a good amount of velocity, good amount of power, still tickle the hypertrophy intensity that we want, or the hypertrophy velocity and the strength velocity we want, but without then going so much into fatigue that we end up falling off a cliff, and then we just end up, spending 35 minutes of our session just squatting, just benching, just deadlifting. That stuff comes later on in the program when my strength needs to get more performance specific. But right now, we're in a general strength and muscle building, power building phase. And therefore, cluster sets for me are the number one weapon in my arsenal that I use personally. And if I've got athletes that I'm seeing only once or twice a week, and we're going into a strength block, or we're just preparing them to go into a strength block for 4 or 5 weeks, this is a real quick way to strap on some tissue, strap on some strength, prepare their body to those high volumes of work, so that when we taper that back down into the more specific high intensity stuff with a little bit lower volume, that stuff's easy bread and butter, and they can smash it out. So that's that dealt with. Tomorrow, which is the 26th of March, is my next long run. So I've got train to catch. I'm running back home this evening, back to the sunny climes of Chester, and I'm then going to be doing the run tomorrow on the same course that I did my 50-miler attempt 2 weeks ago. Again, it's the same course as the 100-miler. So tomorrow I'm just going to go around the 100-miler loop, or at least hopefully 70 to 80k of that as well. So I got to go because I've got a train to catch. But on tomorrow's vlog, I will just be basically just running around talking nonsense about my day. So that'll be a little bit more of a, what I'm doing on an hour-to-hour basis for the best part of running around the Cheshire countryside for 10 hours. Right, guys, cheers for tuning in again. Hopefully that was quite useful to you guys. As always, if you want to know a little bit more about the cluster sets and the velocity-based training, I'm going to do my sports science shorts videos for YouTube, and on my Instagram account at Dr. P Performance, I'm going to do the infographics and stuff that kind of accompany that as well. So you've got a couple of different resources there if none of that made sense. Right, you wonderful humans, go have a great rest of your day. Take it easy. Peace. Happy running and lifting.